The early contactees were persons who claimed that they had been taken aboard UFOs, which they call flying saucers at that time.
And of being taken aboard by 3 unearthly creatures, questioned under hypnosis and lie detectors, but their story remained intact.
Flying saucers, dragons in the sky, angels descending from space. Human history is full of these stories. Stories beyond science that cannot be measured or calculated. Something that we have never understood. But to the people who experience these things, one thing is very real: the impact it has on them for the rest of their lives. Just about 40 minutes from downtown Los Angeles, in the big Tujunga Canyon, one such story began in March of 1953, an alien encounter that would set off a chain of events for years to come. It began with 2 women in a remote cabin and a mysterious blinding light in the middle of the night. The entire details of the abduction would not come to light until the 1970s, during a hypnosis session at the LAPD headquarters. This is the story of the Tujunga Canyon contacts. In the years after World War II, something strange began to happen. From remote deserts in New Mexico, to frozen lakes in Finland, from small towns in the Midwest, to military skies above Korea. People were seeing things, lights, discs, shapes that made no sense and had no explanation. By the late 1940s, the US military was investigating dozens of reports a month. Unidentified flying objects, or UFOs, was now a phrase printed in newspapers, mentioned over the radio, and spreading through society. These sightings were occurring everywhere, and slowly the stories began to change. It wasn't just what people were seeing anymore, it's what they were experiencing. Encounters, forgotten memories, lost time. Long before these experiences would become known as alien abductions, one of these stories was quietly beginning in the mountains just north of Los Angeles. I had first heard about this story online and decided I needed to find out more. The Tujunga Canyon Contacts was written by Anne Druffel and D. Scott Togo, 2 researchers who followed this case for years. It began with Sarah Shaw and Jan Whitley, the 2 women at the center of this story, living together in a remote cabin in the Tujunga Canyon. Their real names were changed to protect their identities. In March of 1953, Sarah and Jan were asleep when they were suddenly awakened by a light, bluish-white in color, that was so intense it filled the entire cabin. It was 2 in the morning, and then complete silence, a dead stillness, as if time itself had frozen. Sarah jumped up from her bed and began to look out the window of their cabin, when she began noticing multiple shadow-like figures approaching the cabin. Next thing they knew, 2 hours had gone by, and they were still sitting in their room. At first, this was all they could remember. Just fragments, emotions, and the sense that something else had happened that night. It wouldn't be until decades later, under hypnosis, that Sarah would start to remember more. Jan remembered even less. Just the light and the silence. A pattern would start to appear throughout the book. Other women, friends, acquaintances, some speculate lovers, were coming forward with similar stories. They all had had experiences they couldn't explain. Missing time, bright lights, strange beings, nightmares that felt more like memories. And they all knew Sarah and Jan. The book gave me a direction, but the big Tujunga Canyon itself began to take center stage. I came here expecting to trace one story, Sarah and Jan, but what I found was something much bigger. According to researcher Anne Druffel, this entire region is what she referred to as a window area, a place where unexplained phenomena seem to occur frequently. In the late 1960s, 2 hikers claimed to chase a glowing disc into the canyon until their car broke down. One of them said they saw a fireball rise out of a hill and a beam of light shoot into the trees. Another incident mentioned in the book during the 1960s was the light people, misty gray figures who appeared to be spying on groups of local school students camping out in the wilderness. Sightings in the Tujunga Canyon area go as far back as May 2nd, 1949. 2 Glendale women, Marion W. Mills and Ina Monroe, saw a silvery shining disc flying northwest over the city shortly after noon. It appeared to be made of metal and was traveling quickly. Suddenly it tilted and disappeared from view, heading towards the Little Tujunga Canyon area. Only 18 days later, at least 18 people reported a transparent object hovering in broad daylight over Glendale, a town near the Tujunga Canyon. It suddenly flipped towards the sky and disappeared. On March 10, 1950, at 8:45 a.m., residents of La Crescenta viewed a triangular object traveling towards Big Tujunga Canyon. One witness described the craft as having a gondola-shaped object attached to a light-colored hull. The object traveled slowly, with no audible motor noise. Later that day, a revolving wheel-like object with shiny spokes was reported hovering over the Lockheed Air Terminal at the nearby Burbank Airport. The book goes into countless other encounters in the area. Going back further, the land was originally inhabited by the Tongva and Tataviam peoples and was said to be a ceremonial area, sacred ground. Even in one of the oldest legends tied to Los Angeles, the name Tujunga surfaces, hinting that this land has carried strange energy for centuries. In Horace Bell's On the Old West Coast, he recounts the infamous curse of Griffith Park, a tale involving Don Antonio Feliz, his family estate, and a betrayed niece named Doña Petronia. When the land was taken from her, she placed a chilling curse over the land. According to Bell's telling, she cries to the man who had just stolen her land, quote, "Behold, cast your glance towards the dark entrance of the great canyon of the Tujunga, and what do you see? A myriad demons floating in the air, like so many vultures. They ride the storm clouds." End quote. An eerie invocation of the region's original inhabitants, and a hint that something in this landscape was already considered powerful and maybe dangerous. Whether symbolic or spiritual, the mention of the Tujunga spirits in a 19th century curse reinforces what modern researchers like Anne Druffel would later describe, that this canyon and the lands around it are a kind of window, a place where things slip through. It's clear the area was a hotbed. The women were real, the memories real, at least to them. But the location, the place where it had all started, that was harder to pin down. The book doesn't give coordinates. It never says exactly where Sarah and Jan's cabin was, but he gives fragments. A stream nearby, a meadow, a single-lane trail down from the road, a few scattered cabins built before the war, some now abandoned, others long gone. I started following old fire roads, talked to locals, looked for anything that matched the topography described in the book, and eventually I found it, or at least something that looks an awful lot like it in the same area. Hello. See guys, this cabin is definitely from the right era. So this is exactly what the cabin would have looked like. There's even furniture in here. There's an old kitchen. Look at this. The door's been knocked down. People have been in here. Look at the kitchen. Oh, this old fireplace. Even some old utensils. Look at that. For Sarah Shaw, it would take nearly 20 years to remember what happened to her that night in the cabin. Sarah's hypnosis sessions were guided by Dr. Martin Rizier, a forensic psychologist who would later found the LAPD's Behavioral Science Services Unit. He wasn't some fringe figure. He was the department's internal expert on trauma, interrogation, and memory. and he took her serious. The hypnosis session began with Sarah recalling herself waking up that night, nearly 20 years ago. There was no wind, no noise, just cold mechanical silence. She remembered sitting up in bed, suddenly alert. Something wasn't right. She remembered the bright light, a bluish-white glow, filling the room. And that's when she felt it, a presence, multiple of them. They had come in through a side door of the cabin, and suddenly they were there. Tall, slender, with long arms and smooth mask-like faces that didn't move. Sarah was frozen, not by fear, but by something else. She couldn't move or speak. Jan, her partner, was still lying beside her. The next thing Sarah recalled was standing, but she hadn't gotten up. She was upright, as if her body had been lifted into place. Two beings approached her, and without speaking, only thoughts and impressions, she knew they wanted her to come with them. As they led her toward the door of the cabin, she looked down and realized her feet weren't touching the ground. She was floating. Outside the cabin, a beam of light poured down from above. She compared it to an escalator during her hypnosis session, and it pulled her up slowly. It guided her towards a dark, rounded shape in the sky, hovering directly above the clearing in front of their cabin. And that's where the memory ended for that session. A few weeks later, Sarah returned for her second hypnosis session, this time with a different doctor, Dr. Bill McCall. The goal was the same, to pick up where the memory had left off. And what came out was something much stranger. Sarah remembered being inside the craft. The light around her was dim, but even. There was no fixtures, no bulbs, just illumination that seemed to radiate from the walls themselves. The space was curved, metallic but soft. There was no sense of time, no sense of sound. She couldn't tell how large it was, but she knew she wasn't alone. The beings were there, watching, silent. They moved smoothly, without walking. She couldn't tell how many. Their faces stayed the same, expressionless, like carved porcelain masks. They placed her on a surface, something like a table. A pale beam of light passed through her, scanning her body. She couldn't move, but she wasn't in pain. She described the light as alive, controlled, and as it passed over her, she had the overwhelming sense that the beings were recording her, somehow capturing her body's data. Not with machines, but through light and mineral. She said they used stone slabs beneath her, sliding them in and out of the table. As the light passed through, she believed the stone absorbed the imprint of her, almost like an X-ray, but more advanced, more permanent. At some point, the beings communicated with her telepathically. They told her something important, something about medicine, about healing, about cancer. But the information was too complex, too much. She said it passed through her like a flood she couldn't hold on to. All she remembered was the feeling that what they showed her mattered, that it had purpose. The memory ended the same way it began. Suddenly, no transition. She was back in bed. Her body was sore. Jan was still asleep beside her. 2 hours had passed, but it felt like no time at all. And Sarah wasn't the only one. Over the next few years, other women would come forward, each with their own stories, different times, different places, but all with the same patterns. Sarah's story was the first to surface, but it wasn't the last. In 1975, Emily Cronin came forward with her own account. A different time, a different place, but the same canyon, the same light, the same silence. One night while driving home through the canyon with her young son and a friend, none other than Jan Whitley, they decided to pull over and rest. The road was quiet, isolated. They left the engine off, letting the silence wrap around them. But then, just like before, the air changed. A bright white light descended onto the car. Neither of them could move. They weren't unconscious. They were aware, but utterly paralyzed. Emily described trying to move her hand, one finger at a time. Slowly, painfully, she broke the paralysis. And with that, the moment shattered. They started the car, drove away, pulled into a roadside cafe, dazed and shaken. At first, Emily chalked it up to stress, a weird night, a trick of the brain, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. So like Sarah, she agreed to hypnosis. What she remembered next was nearly identical to Sarah's account, only this time she wasn't alone. The craft was saucer-shaped, the light impossibly bright, and tall, thin beings moved around the vehicle, circling it, observing. But there was one detail Emily couldn't shake. The beings seemed particularly interested in her son. They didn't speak, they didn't enter the car, but she felt their focus. like her family had been marked. And when she told her story to Anne Druffel, she learned something else. She wasn't the only one. Other women, other friends of Jan, had quietly begun reporting similar encounters. It was a pattern, and at the center of it all was Jan. By the time Emily Cronin came forward, the pattern was clear. Every woman who reported missing time, strange lights, or entities around the Tujunga Canyon area was connected to one person, Jan Whitley. And in 1975, the next voice in that growing circle was Lori Briggs. Lori had just graduated from UCLA. She didn't believe in UFOs. She had never heard of Sarah Shaw or Emily Cronin. But what happened to her one summer night would force her to question everything. It began with silence, then a sound, high-pitched, sharp, almost metallic. Her roommate, Joe, was a chronic insomniac, but tonight she'd fallen asleep instantly. Something felt wrong. Lori tried to wake Joe, shaking her by the shoulders, whispering her name. Nothing. She wouldn't budge. Then came the voices, not out loud but inside her head, clear, calm, and completely alien. They were speaking to her, not with words but with thought. She said they asked her to come with them. She refused. Then the pitch rose, sharper, urgent, a mental tug of war. She remembers trying to scream but couldn't, trying to run but couldn't move. Everything froze. When Joe finally woke, both women said the same thing. It felt like hours had passed, but the clock said barely 10 minutes, a chunk of time missing. In the days that followed, Lori began to draw, not just images of the encounter, but memories. A table made of stone, a beam of light scanning through her chest, her body suspended, weightless. She hadn't remembered being abducted, not until the drawings, not until the hypnosis. Under hypnosis, it all came back. The floating, the glowing interior, the silent beings. She remembered being told she was being recorded, not just examined, that the light they used could store memory, or imprint her essence onto slabs of stone. Lori wasn't alone. Joe Main, her roommate, also began experiencing flashes, brief images of a dark room, triangular shapes rising from the floor, and a voice in her head she couldn't place. When Joe underwent hypnosis, she described merging with a kind of light and speaking to an unseen presence, not a creature but a consciousness. Each story was different, but the elements were the same. Missing time, paralysis, silent entities, a beam of light, and somehow all of them friends, partners, acquaintances, were connected through Jan. Sarah had lived with Jan in that cabin in 1953. Emily was her close friend. Lori and Joe met her years later, unaware of the original abduction, but still drawn into something eerily similar. None of them knew the full story, but somehow they were all pulled into the same web. Under hypnosis, Sarah described how during their abduction, the beings seemed especially focused on Jan. At one point, she remembered them examining Jan's chest, repeatedly scanning the area around her breast. It left Jan deeply disturbed. Sarah would later say Jan felt violated, exposed, and targeted. And then years later, Jan was diagnosed with breast cancer. She underwent a full mastectomy. The cancer went into remission, but eventually returned. It would take her life in 1987. Sarah, who claimed the beings had given her a cure for cancer, spent years trying to pursue a medical career, hoping somehow to uncover what she was shown. She never made it to medical school. She became a dental hygienist instead, but the obsession never left her. She believed what the beings gave her was meant to help Jan, but by the time she could remember it, it was too late. Sarah Shaw believed she had received a cure for cancer during her abduction experience. Under hypnosis, she recalled being shown this cure by the entities aboard the craft. Later, she came to believe that the cure involved a substance resembling vinegar oil. This belief was so strong that she attempted to share the cure with a physician, Dr. Alini, who had reportedly heard of a similar remedy from another individual claiming to have received it from UFO entities. For all the women involved, the memories came slowly and never complete. But Jan never fully remembered anything. No matter how many sessions, no matter how many dreams, some believed she couldn't remember because she had been through the most, and whatever happened in 1953 may have never really let her go. The Tujunga Canyon contacts remains a mystery to this day, a story that possibly continues to unfold, a chain of events that started in 1953 and continued for decades. The power of the Tujunga Canyons is undeniable. Maybe one day we will understand what really happened here.
Reported sightings are on the rise amid recent government acknowledgement of UFOs or UAPs as potential threats. The latest research estimates only around 5% or less of people who witness unusual aerial phenomenon, though, actually are filing a report.
Returning to base, one member spotted moving objects. The chief cameraman quickly prepared his camera and filmed them for about 10 seconds before they disappeared. These are the actual pictures he took. Two shiny discs moving away in the top left-hand corner.